be a little more proactive in making certain that when something happens to a document or needs to happen to a document, they are taking an active role in that. I believe Ben expressed a similar sense.
Yeah, that's what I said that to you.
But I specifically, I'm telling my working group chairs this where appropriate.
Yes, I should do that as you suggested. Whenever people public stuff, tell the shepherd.
Well, I was actually gonna compose an email, like a form email, and like send it by you to sort of get input, and then we can use the same thing.
We can send it to our chairs first.
3:20 is when this is supposed to get rolling, right?
Yes, so that was 42 seconds ago. We are behind.
Okay, so is this on? All right. So it's 3:20. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the SIPCORE working group session. I'm Jean Mahoney. This is Adam Roach.
No, I'm Brian Rosen.
Oh, pardon me. Yes, Brian.
It may be hard to believe, but I am sitting in for Brian Rosen, who is your new working group chair. As he pointed out, when we published the original set of documents, he was one of the SIP chairs. So he's tickled to be able to return in this later era to resume that role. Unfortunately, he can't be here, and he has what Ben and I agree is the most awesome excuse ever, which is that he is serving as the armorer for the U.S. fencing team in it's Bulgaria, right?
Junior World Championships.
Yeah,
for
so
the U.S. fencing team.
He
is the armorer.
Yes.
So I assume he's, helping clean up FAs and foils.
Pictures of it didn't happen.
He didn't. That's right. I asked him for a picture and he didn't send it. Well, I'll see if I can get one. Okay. So note well. We've started circulating the blue sheets. Please sign. Need a note taker. Who would like to take notes? I know nobody would like to take notes, but who will volunteer anyway? Yes. Thank you, Jonathan.
That's his normal dodge.
Are there any working group chairs in here for which Gene is not taking notes for at one time or another?
Actually, okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, here's the agenda. So I'd like to tag on a few things at the any other business. Roland had a document dispatched this Monday to SIPCORE, so he would like to say a few words about that. And Rafat also wanted to talk about the digest authentication scheme for SIP. Is Rafat here?
Yeah, he just walked in.
Oh, all right, great. All right, so here's our slide with the chair changes. And no pictures, but yes, I'm sure Adam is thrilled to be moving on to bigger and better things.
No, I'm just happy Brian's coming on board. Yeah.
Okay, so status of the working group. We have document status. We've got an RFC for DNS dual stack. Thank you to the authors in the working group for getting that done. Last call has ended for Henning's draft, the SIPCORE status unwanted. We've got name matter guidance, working group, last call has ended for that. And then Krister's draft, the SIPCORE content ID is in working group last call. Please provide your feedback by April 13th. And the next working group document is call info spam, which will be presented today. Just an update on the milestones. We've completed one with the request publication of DNS lookup of procedures for dual stack client and server handling of SIP URIs. We're making good headway on the rest of them. The SIPCORE status unwanted, call info spams, content ID. Whoa, what have I done? Here we go. The name matter guidance. We have also happy eyeballs. Now we're not discussing it today, but that is definitely on the milestones. Yep. So recently dispatched from the dispatch working group. Now, since we've rechartered, we can now handle a little bit more, like self-contained small updates to SIP. So we have the Winterbottom SIPCORE luck param draft, and Roland will be presenting that today. And also the second draft, which was dispatched on Monday, and he'll be talking about that at the end of the meeting. Also is Marianne Mulholly's draft on a p-served user header field parameter for originating CDIV, session case, and SIP. No, we're not discussing that today, but that was also dispatched to the working group. Now recall, documents that come from dispatch means that the dispatch working group thought that this was the best place for the work to happen. The SIPCORE working group can still decide whether or not to take that work on. So we should take a look at these drafts and then decide if we've got the energy and interest for them. All right, so that's what I have for working group status. Anybody have any questions? All righty. Henning?
Shall I keep going slide? Okay. I wanted to give an update and kind of get hopefully relatively final comments on the call info draft. So this is part of a larger effort, as you well know. I suspect most of you are in STIR. Who was not in STIR? A few people. I mean, one or two. Next, please. So, and this is for you. The problem that we're facing, as this is probably one of the few SIP problems that all of us have, is that we have lots of unwanted calls. Some are illegal, and unfortunately, some are just unwanted, as in the caller is entitled to call you, you're entitled not to like that call. And so this is for scams, but then there are particular charity calls, so they are legal in the United States to landlines, not to cell phones that came out of the notion that you used to pay for incoming calls, and political calls, surprise, surprise, and survey calls. And then we have a category of robocalls which are actually wanted, but most people, at least some people, misunderstand the call. They think it's a scam call, but this could be something like your prescription is ready or a school is closed or whatever. And we need to do a bunch of things to do that. Next. So the basic thing is that we have the perspective of SIP-related things. We have the whole STIR effort of signing calls to prevent call ID spoofing. And then we have three things that are more relevant here. And I just want to make sure that they don't get confused. So there is an effort, not in SIP. I'm sorry? There is an effort called VERSTAT, which simply indicates that the SIP proxy has validated the call ID through STIR in that. That's done in 3GPP. I don't think we have anything to do with that unless I'm missing a draft. Then, and this is what I'll be talking about in more depth today, is there is a survey or a call type indicator, I should say, like survey, that allows the called party to make a more reasoned decision as to how to handle the call. The problem, and I'll talk about that again in more depth in a minute, is that the carriers in general, because of the spectrum of goodness for robocalls, are very reluctant to get into the call filtering business because they're afraid that they filter the wrong calls, and in some cases that's a legal problem. You're not supposed to do that. It kind of the early versions of network neutrality for Title II carriers, and secondly, they just think it's bad business if they do that. There's already a fair amount of controversy because they do filter SMS messages in order to get rid of SMS spam, and there have been a number of cases where legitimate organizations have complained that they, for whatever reason, get filtered. And then there's the second draft, the unwanted draft, which is almost done, besides kind of a last call revision. Next. So, like I said, some carriers will want to leave the filtering to the end user or possibly an app on the end user device. So that's as likely to be an app as a person. So again, because of a false positive that they want to avoid, and also one because there are going to be calls that some people will want to accept, and some people like to be talking to survey takers. When people are bored and maybe, or if they think that talking to Nielsen or to Gallup or one of the established survey entities is actually kind of civic duty that they want to participate in. And so, and some people just hate them. And some people are happy to talk to them, but just not at dinner time or whatever. And so we also want device handling. So you can imagine all kinds of more diversified mechanisms that you end up handling. So you can forward to voicemail instead of getting bothered. You can just display some textual information. You can change the ringing behavior. For example, in the Android and I think iOS do not disturb feature, you might label them with a low priority so they don't ring your phone, they just vibrate. You might have a local app, like I mentioned. You might consult an address book. Maybe you put them in there as a whitelist and they ring through, make it time of day dependent, all kinds of fanciness you can do. But unless you label the call in some way, none of that can happen. You can't build, the only other way to do it is that you then issue a query to a third party to say, I got this call from a phone number, do something, tell me what it is. But that's obviously A, proprietary, and B, it means you now have to trust a third party. And there are now several companies, Hire, just to name one, that do that, but you now have to trust that third party with your call data. We talked about some of the privacy issues that we have in STIR just earlier today. So if you don't want to do that, then you have to do it on device and locally with information that is provided by the entities that already know that you're being called, namely the carrier. So there's a privacy aspect to that as well. Next. So the basic idea, and I rearranged the slide, should have rearranged the slide. So the basic idea, I'll tell you the syntax in a minute, but if you don't remember, the most significant bit of that is a label. It's a enumerated label that allows an entity, typically the originating or terminating carrier, to label as according to a number of categories, about a dozen or so at the moment, that would be commonly understood and the usual extension mechanism. So last time when this was discussed, there were, I think, a number of reasonable concerns that were expressed. So let me see if I can be fair in summarizing those and maybe give you my perspective on those. So categories are somewhat arbitrary, unavoidable. The categories aren't completely made up. You'll see them. So there are a number of categories which are just given by law or regulation, at least in the US and many other countries, where certain sets of things are labeled in a certain way. So it may not be always clear what a survey is. I mean, is your bank calling you, but customer service, is that one, whatever. But there's a relatively well-established set of things that at least a survey taker should know whether they fall into that category or not, assuming they don't cheat. Charities are well-defined legally, at least in most countries, as not-for-profit designations and so on. Political calls are well-defined, all of that. And we also have what turns out that there is a number of these type of third-party apps, and this is a screen one of them higher, that do something that turns out to be very similar. The categories are not 100% the same, so there's some very specific ones like IRS scam, which obviously kind of something that hopefully comes and disappears, but they are fairly similar. If you look at the list, you'll see a large overlap in that. So that seems to be, at least arguably, that matches deployed reality in that. And there is some overlap, not a whole lot, with the old SS7 calling party category as well. There's not much overlap there because most of them, operator services, isn't terribly relevant to what we're trying to do here. Categories are somewhat guesses. So how do you get to the category? And there are two ways to get that. One is probabilistic and one is declarative. So the probabilistic one is something like that, where when you get a call with an app on your phone, you can basically push the spam button. And if you like, you can also label the call afterwards. You can do that in the address book, or you can do it at call time. And you get to choose among those type of categories. And so you can imagine a scenario where the likely thing would be that in order to minimize kind of mislabeling is that you would, for high volume robocallers, you're likely going to get lots and lots of reports, hundreds, thousands of reports. And so if that number that you just, you want to label as a carrier or as some third-party entity along the call path is almost everybody labels this as a political call, you can be pretty sure that that's what it is. At least that's what people perceive it to be in terms of if it's kind of, some people label it as a survey, some as a political cause, some as, I don't know, telemarketer, I don't know what, then you may not want to label it at all because you're likely going to guess wrong. So that's a more probabilistic type of mechanism, which I suspect will work mostly well since there isn't a whole lot of overlap. In some cases, like I said, you could say survey and political intentionally because there's some disputes, push surveys, all of that. But the other thing, and this came up a little bit in the STIR context as well, is that at some point in the future, originating carriers, they know exactly what category of call that is in many cases. If you go through the list that I'll show in a slide or two, they already know that this is a call that's being placed from a penitentiary, prison call. They know that this is a call that's being placed by a financial institution. It's their customer. They know that it's a government agency, et cetera. And so they can label those calls, and in order to prevent spoofing of that information, the longer term vision is this would be turned into one of the tags that you can sign in the JWT that you would have in this STIR framework, so that the originating carrier, the one that faced the caller facing carrier, can do the labeling. And to the extent that you can believe that carrier, you can, you can, if you make a mistake, then or intentionally mislead, well, you presumably figure that one out, and you're terminating carrier, and you can basically, there's fraud and statutes and everything else involved, so at least reputable carriers presumably won't do that. Next. So the parameters, get more into syntax, is 4 things. So the spam probability, which is really kind of just a very rough measure of uncertainty. I don't like these type of uncertainty measures because it's never quite clear what 50% actually means. It's like 50% chance of rain. What does that actually mean? It's not like you have 2 alternate realities that you flip a coin for, and then heads or tails, it rains or not. But it gives some indication to the extent you care, and simply I use that because email spam indicators seem to do something like that. But I don't think it's terribly useful, except as kind of I'm almost sure it's not spam. I'm kind of unsure. There are lots of people reporting it, but not. I'm kind of yellowish in that. And this is almost definitely spam. Nobody that has gotten the call, has not reported it as spam, or all the indicators of this is spam because it has some other, like for example, number is spoofed or whatever. So you can be almost sure this turns into red. And indeed, if you haven't seen that, in the newer versions of Android, they actually do some version of that. So when you get a call, it's either your normal background color or the background color of your dialer turns red, and it has some indicator. This is a spam call. The type of call I talked at length, and then the reason, the source of the data. This is not a structured one. This is simply a indicator as to what, where, how that was derived for debugging and other similar purposes. So I borrowed that from Spam Assassin headers, which indicate as to which filter triggered that. That's most likely only be useful in a PBX type of context, where you do your own, but local source does its own work on identifying things, and you want to log as to why you got there later. And then the source is the domain of the that inserted the data, so you can know whether it was done locally or by somebody else. So it looks like a call info header, the usual stuff that happens. Next. I won't go through the call categories. You can read them, their definitions in alphabetical order. So the usual stuff is a business call, so emergency alerts, fraud, health-related, informational, not-for-profit, etc. In some cases, obviously, you could imagine that these would be, they're meant to be exclusive in that. Now, obviously, a fraud could be fraudulent business, but you wouldn't do that. You would just label it as a fraud as opposed to a business in that case. Next, more personal call. You would expect prison calls. That's been long labeled as a calling party category because of typically fraud or other things that if you got a call from a prison, you might want to be aware of if it wasn't somebody you knew who was in that unfortunate situation. Spam call is everything else, and trusted, this is an entity that has like a electric utility or something that at least as an entity can be trusted. Next, I think that's it. And then there's a feature capability indicator that allows you to, until we have signing, and this is really an intermediate, a kind of an interim step, so that if you get one, you want to be sure that it was inserted by your local trusted entity. Otherwise, anybody can insert anything. And so there is this mechanism where the user agent is supposed to ignore it unless it has gotten a SIP call info spam indicator when registering, meaning that the local SIP proxy will insert those and remove any ones that it did not insert or otherwise has reason to trust for some kind of immediate trust relationship that it has established separately in that. So this is a, like I said, this should be part of a passport claim in the future in that. Okay. I'm hoping I'm not a call feature capability expert. So if somebody who does that more frequently knows, if the people, for example, if that's the right label, tell me if it's not. Okay, next one, I think that's pretty much it.
That's it.
That's it. So again, I wanted to get some feedback on both the overall approach, or discussed it at some length before, and also in terms of just more mechanics to see if there's anything I need to change to make it sufficiently useful.
Okay. I know when this came up in dispatch, there was more than a little conversation about the mechanism in terms of just like, is this the way we want to handle these sorts of things? I'm surprised that we have no microphone line. Is everyone awake?
I think the person who had the strongest objection is currently absent, so I'm...
Sean Peterson. I mean, I think if I recall from dispatch, all I said was this point about putting it into passport, right? In the sense of like having this be a secure indication, having it be signed actually seems kind of important to this, right? In the sense of this is exactly the kind of thing that I would, if I were spammer, would love to be able to just get call infos in there that say the source of this is this thing that you trust and everything else, and then not have it be signed, right? And so it's, I wonder, you know, I mean, I would say it has no value, right, without signing, but definitely I think having it be incorporated into passport certainly tremendously strengthens the value of the mechanism.
And that's why I put in this intermediate step for my kind of the step in the previous one where you're supposed to strip it unless you know that it's inserted by the PBX or by your local trusted carrier in that. And so to the extent that this is at least a consenting adults type of thing where unless you get a register response back that says, I will protect you against what you said, then you should ignore it
anyway.
And ignore it anyway, because that seems to, again, I can't prevent that somebody doesn't do what they claim to do, but certainly the idea is that in the pre-passport phase, which will be probably a little bit, that we can at least use it in the model that the terminating carrier can consult its database and do its thing, and I can be reasonably sure that I'm not going to be hoodwinked. Okay, Subir.
Subir Das, I think two quick questions. First one, I just want to know that, so today I know that we have a do not call registry in US, right?
Right.
So I don't know how that works.
So we do not call, let me answer it before you get on to the next question. Let me answer that question. So the do not call registry was designed at a time when people selling newspapers was the scourge. You might remember those days if you're sufficiently aged. So the way it works is you register, as a consumer, you register your mobile or your landline number, and actually, it doesn't really, for mobile, you don't really, this is for, as I said, we do not call is for commercial calls in general, not robocalls specifically. Because robocalls and mobile number are generally speaking not allowed unless you signed up for them. So what you register for is your number, and a telemarketing company is by law in the US, and I believe it's true in Canada as well, is obligated to check the list and not call you. Now, needless to say, if you're committing fraud and extortion, you don't worry about getting a do not call violation ticket. It's kind of like we said, the bank robber doesn't necessarily worry about it. The parking meter just ran out. And so the do not call list prevents calls from legitimate US-based in the US-based entities. It has essentially, has no effect on the people that we're talking about here. Namely, there are two categories. Namely, ones that are criminal or close to it. I mean, they may not be criminal, maybe do not call violation are civil violations. They're not unfortunately, you can't go to jail for making robocalls unless you do something else like extortion. But you can get fined a hefty amount as a civil violation. And the ones which are legitimate calls in the sense they're not illegal, like the survey political charity type of calls, but many people prefer not to receive. And so this is in no way solves the same problem as we do not call us. We do not call us just doesn't solve a problem that we have today.
No, I know, but because I registered, it does not work all the way, right? So, but the next question is that if this is there, then is it that onus of the call party to register accurately to the provider that I am such and such, and then provider will do that attestation?
Yeah, so that's what I said. If we get to the passport level, we will likely see many of the good guys that do want to make calls that could be mistaken for illegal or unwanted calls. They will want to label their calls so that a recipient, let's say, think of NIH does surveys, community surveys by phone. They have a problem that because people hate survey takers or think that they're scams, they don't pick up the phone. They want people to know this is a government agency, and in this case, that's the prevalent one, and so that they increase the chances that somebody will believe that they actually are from a government agency as opposed to somebody who's trying to swindle them out of their paycheck and they will label it, it will get signed at some point, and so on. Initially, like I said earlier, is that won't happen. It will be based on data that's available by the terminating carrier or third parties contracted by the terminating carrier. Most of us, I didn't know about, but it is a fairly booming business of data companies that are used by primarily financial institutions to label calls that are placed to financial institutions for fraud prevention. So they use all kinds of databases to indicate as to who the caller is, as by name, by category, are they claim to be, how likely they are fraudulent, all of that. So there actually is today, and then there's the, like I mentioned earlier, the human feedback mechanism. Currently, and this is the one missing piece that we don't quite have yet, is ideally what I showed in the higher feedback, you should be able to send that back with the unwanted response as well. I haven't done that yet. So the same response categories would also eventually should flow back. I haven't touched that yet until we get the other pieces.
Andrew, I'm a little bit confused. Maybe there's an error on the slide, or is there both a feature tag and a feature capability indicator?
I'm sorry.
It says in the bullet a feature tag, but the
Yes.
title is feature capability indicator. So are these two different things or the same thing?
I'm trying to, again, this is probably
The title of
where,
the slide says,
yeah, it's a
feature
meaning that
capability.
this is a global feature capability.
yeah,
And this is one where I haven't done this stuff in a while, feature tag stuff. The idea is it's meant to be in the IANA global feature tag capability registry, unless I
yeah,
screwed
not.
up.
So this doesn't go. You're not talking about a feature tag in the contact header of the register, the response to the register. You're talking about
Exactly.
in the feature capability header.
Yes, yes, right.
Okay.
I mean,
So
do take a look. Do take a look at the draft. Just make sure I didn't screw that up because I copy pasted and I could well have miscopy pasted that because I just said I couldn't quite. I admit I had trouble when I looked at the registration information for that particular registry to know exactly what I was supposed to do. It kind of seemed to be going in circles. So if somebody has done the 3GPP type of stuff, I directly took as our 3GPP style feature tags.
So this is a feature capability indicator in the SIP global tree. I have a draft. It has expired, but it's actually a 3GPP dependency, which tries to populate some of the current media feature tags as feature capability indicators. So we might want to talk a little bit.
Great. Happy to. I mean, this is, housekeeping we should get right, and I'm probably not doing it completely right.
So feature capabilities, we do have an expert for doing the reviews for
Okay.
the IANA registry, and that's Paul Kisbet.
Okay. I will.
And I
if you
believe
note taker,
Krista is
make
a
sure that's
backup.
in the note.
On that.
I'm been kind of involved in this work, so I don't know if, I can do a review, but I'm not,
Yeah, I'm mainly
Okay.
concerned that the registration is, just as a very narrow item, I'm just that this is right, and just mechanical right, that somebody doesn't tell me I got the wrong registry and the wrong label. So one thing I don't quite understand is, for example, there's this difference between global and non-global, and I never quite, I admit, I chased a few drafts and I never quite got a convincing mental model as to which one it should be, which one should be SIP and which one should be at something. Thank you.
So this is going in either in an intermediate proxy that's on the path of the register, or it's coming from the registrar. Is that the?
Yeah, so the assumption is it would be the entity you're registering with. So this would be an IMS, your local carrier, and in a enterprise, it would be your proxy, your PBX, or your SIP trunking provider, whatever it happens to be. So the assumption is that that's the only entity you have any reason to trust. And so the idea is that you would do what it says to prevent exactly what John or whatever said, that the bad guys will obviously make themselves look good. And this seems to be forget where I borrowed that from, but somebody else has done some version of that. I mean, the same basic idea, you ignore it unless somebody tells you that you shouldn't ignore it.
All right. Any other comments?
And I would, I mean, I think I'm pretty well, besides this stuff, I consider myself pretty well done. So feedback now would be quite helpful so they can actually meet our milestone.
All right. Yeah. So yes, feedback on the feature capability indicator. If folks could also
any
read this, and then we could
categories that
do
are missing. Yep.
Yeah, working group last call. So, awesome. Thank you. All right. So next one is, I have to go. Roland.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Roland Jeske from Deutsche Telekom, and I'm presenting this draft here. This was already presented in dispatch at the last Prague meeting, which is about 1.5 years ago. That was James who presented it, and it's along nearby the same presentation, since nothing heavily has been appeared with regard to that. It was only to be dispatched to SIPCORE due to the fact that the stuff is now ready, let's say it in that way. What does the draft describe is, at least we have this geolocation header field in RFC 6442, which could be added within a SIP message a couple of times, so that we have locations added by different entities, including the user equipment, and the order of values. So this field will indicate which entity has added the geolocation header field, and this is needed to allow the service, at least, which is the emergency service for Europe, to indicate which entity is at least trustful, or which entity is to be taken to use the location. So that's at least the issue what's described. Next head. So who wants it? Yes, it's ETSI. There's a project 493 which defines the emergency call for Europe. So this is a issue where regulators, vendors, and operators are within, and they have put this location header field as a information within their specification, and at least that's the last bit which is missing. They want to get ready for, let's say, final approval of their document, and now it's missing to have this SIP element. So next one. So the question is how to proceed now. So there were a couple of comments with regard of this document, and I've overtaken the work from James to proceed it here in IETF further until we get an RFC, and I've added all comments that were appearing, and we had a discussion in February with regard. So I have put this into the dispatch draft, and since I get a comment from Colin that we have, or this should be done within SIPCORE, I've changed the naming and put it towards the SIPCORE group. So my question is how to proceed now, because from my point of view and what I get from the comments, it's ready. Could we start as soon as possible, working group last call, or do we have to go further for other procedures, or would there possibility to have a AD sponsorship? So that are the possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Who has read the document? I see 3 hands, 4 hands. Okay. So, and we had discussed the maybe AD sponsorship here, although since it was touching, updating 6442, we were hoping for more eyes on this draft.
Ben Campbell, speaking for myself, and I think the other ADs, none of the ADs were really excited about sponsoring something that touches location conveyance.
Right. So
Without the sort of review that it would need if it was going through the working group anyway.
Okay, so who volunteers to take a look at it? Review the document.
Can you say, can you, in order to make use of your time, can you tell us a little bit more what this parameter looks like, practically speaking? Give an example. I'm just having a harder time picturing what this actually is. There's some overlap.
Yeah.
Being self-interested, there's some overlap with I presented, not we use it, but the same issue of who inserted it. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. You're referring to this XML element provided by? What?
I'm going to pull up your draft so we can pull up an example. So, right. So yeah, let me pull up the draft.
Are you wondering about like the values here?
Where are we?
Yeah, I was of the range of values in here. Is this a?
These are things like
answered
these
it.
came
It's
from
the domain.
the local net. Well, these are 850 codes.
We're talking,
No.
Oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead. Never mind.
Next presentation. Here, let's see. It was. Okay, sorry.
Two very different kinds of location today. That's why I was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or down.
Here's the example.
There we go. So.
Log source. Okay,
Yep.
so it is a domain name.
okay. I assume you have the same problem that we just discussed, talking about. Right, but I mean, it just seems.
I don't know if it's the same source for the geolocation header in general, because if you actually follow the HTTPS URL, the reason why you trust what's on the other side of it is because you trust the trust taker of that HTTPS URL, right? I mean, it's like, so it's very different once you're transposing this to somewhere where there's some crypto that's telling you who you're talking to and getting the info from. You're just seeing this in a flat header where it's like, hey, I was the source of this. Yeah. I mean, honestly, the reason why you should trust this, right, is because you trust what's on the other side of that URL. Or if it's in a CID, that the object in that CID should be signed or something, right? And you trust it because you trust who signed that. So, I mean, I guess maybe to beg the further question, like, what do you think? What do you do differently, right? Because you see that domain name in lock source than you would do because you just dereference that URL and trust the cert on the other side of it.
So if you have different locations within, so we need to identify which element has added it. So that's why we have this additional header.
Who cares who added it?
The question is which element is the trustful element. So if it is the user equipment or the let's say first proxy which is in the trust domain, or if it is a private proxy which is outside the trust domain, so you have different let's say layers.
So I think where I think both of us are coming from is there are two kinds of things. One is purely for diagnostic purposes, where you want some indication as to who is the inserter, so if it looks wrong, you can blame somebody. But you don't have a threat model. In a sense, you don't have an adversary who's trying to fool you. The one that we are concerned about, as in the previous case, is if somebody wants to spoof their location, they can pretty well figure out which lock source is going to make you believe that location, even if it was generated on user equipment or was generated whatever. They will put in whatever achieves their nefarious goals. So, and I have not looked at the security consideration section, but it seems like this is not adding any security itself, unless you do the signing part, in which case you've already solved that problem.
So yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So we are looking on the trust domain with regard to that. So that's done for IMS, for example. So that's our regulated environment we have in Europe. So with regard to that, so
if you have spec T and you know that you're in a trusted environment, what do you do differently? Because you see this, you then know that it was added by a trusted person. That's why I came up here and asked this question of what you do differently.
That I think I can answer. I think the premise in this is that more than one thing may put stuff in, and they've got a list that's an ordered list at the consumer, and that ordered list will say which one they bother to look at. They're all trusted,
yep.
But some are more preferable to use than others, I think, is the use case.
And people should, thank you.
Yeah. So you're saying basically each of them, you believe that each of them is making, an honest best effort to figure out your location, but you know that some of them are better at it than others, basically?
yeah. So yeah.
You don't understand. I think that is
yes.
why
so,
putting
John Peterson. So even granting that, then why isn't the local source customer or local source carrier instead of a domain name? So you expect that the people that are interpreting this are going to understand from a domain name who the entity is that added this?
Yeah, but that could be different entities including this. So I have an edge proxy or a transit network. So that could be added, the location. So
all right, so let me restate that question. Why do you need that to be readable like that? Why is that just not a blob? You're going to be comparing these in the end to a list that you're keeping anyhow. So why isn't just a string of random bits that also occur in your list? And your answer to that is, well, it'd be nice if it's readable, right, for diagnostic purposes, right? But the jumping all the way to a domain name there probably takes the analysis of what you're trying to do down a hole that it shouldn't have gone down, and may run into problems for you later. Now, the thing that I got up to the mic to start with and I hope this isn't just wasted breath, but you threw in spec T to the question about security, right? And if that's going to be the answer, then I'll just sit down, right? If moving past spec T is not something to put on the table, if it's just a spec T draft, then not. I'll go back to sleep. But the solution, the thing that they were talking for, you don't need that log source thing at all. Just tie in what your source is to that URL. Verify that the URL comes in. The thing that your lists will look at will be the information that they get back from, the domain name out of that URL at that point, which I guess then gets back to John to,
Right. Yeah. Sorry, John Peterson. If you're just doing that, why not just have what's, the source is the list, right? And presumably because it's your trust domain, what's the list in it? So, so if you wanted to do it you want to flag that this geolocation came from a less high resolution source or something, have that semantics be present. I'm just not sure what adding a domain name in this adds to that. And yes, of course, I have nothing but contempt for using spec T to make this seem like it is actually not going to just be arbitrarily populated by whoever wanted.
The other concern that I have is, and this goes to the domain name issue, is if you're, sorry, Henning speaking, if the issue is that you want to do that in an inter-administrative domain context, and primarily the distinction you care about is, was it inserted by the user equipment or the carrier or maybe a location service of some sort? For the recipient, the public safety answering point or terminating carrier, whatever it happens to be, is those labels are completely meaningless. I'm not even sure if I put my domain name based on my IP address for my phone in there, that looks like, I can't tell that that looks like a server, or I have no way of telling that this was the user equipment unless I'm in that very same administrative domain. I know what my naming scheme is, all of that. So if you're trying to functionally label it as opposed to figure out which box to kick within the same administrative domain, it seems like a functional designation, namely this was inserted by user end equipment, by the carrier, by whatever other practical would seem to be more helpful. Because otherwise, what do I know as a downstream carrier how you name your boxes? No idea. And I don't want to learn how you name your boxes, because you want to be able to change it without notifying all your downstream carrier partners. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, feedback? All right. Well, thank you, Roland. I guess you've been given some feedback to chew on. So, all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right. So next up is Rafat.
Okay, next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the idea of the draft is to try to delegate the authentication of the user and the authorization to third-party entity to allow the user later on to register with the SIP network. And so the user will use some non-SIP credentials to do that, and later on be able to register. Typically, we want to use that for single sign-on type of feature, where the user expected typically to use some one set of credentials to get access to SIP and non-SIP services. So next slide, please. So how is this draft different from the previous SIP OAuth draft? So the previous SIP OAuth draft was trying to be kind of very generic framework for authenticating and authorizing SIP services. So we had a very long discussion, John, I, and others on the mailing list, and we couldn't agree to it. We couldn't get to an agreement on that. So this new draft is a scaled down version. It's trying to focus on that, authenticating the user and just allowing the user and the user agent later to just register to the SIP network. So that's the extent of this draft. Okay, next slide. So OAuth defines two types of clients. Actually, talking about clients, and in general, in our case, the client is running on a SIP user agent. So there are two types of clients: a confidential client, which is a client that it secures the credentials that it collects from the user, whether it's credentials or tokens, and a public client which doesn't do that. So typically, like the public client just collect that in credentials and give it to the core. So we're gonna see some use cases that use those two types of clients. Next slide, please. So the first use case is talking about a public user agent with a rich UI. So there are some UIs have very limited user interface. In this case, we're talking about a user or a user agent that has rich UI. So the user agent tries to register, get redirected. So in this case, we're talking about 302. It could be something else. It could be 400. So there's something we could discuss. The user agent then goes to the authorization server, which is out of the scope of this draft. This is just using OAuth mechanism, and authenticates to the user and gets a code, an access code, and then registered with that authorization code, right? The proxy then uses that code to exchange it for token and then allow the registration to complete. So that's one use case, right? Next slide, please. This use case for a public UA with limited UI. So the user interface on that user agent is really limited, or there is no screen at all, right? But the user has access to a browser. So he will that user will use the browser to connect to the authorization server, authenticates, and gets an access code, which is a numeric access code that is limited time. And then the user agent collects that code from the user and sends that to in the registration. The proxy exchanges that code with a token and allows the registration to complete. Next slide, please. So in this case, we're talking about confidential UA with a rich UI. In this case, the UA directly goes to the authorization server, authenticates, and obtains tokens directly, and then uses those tokens to register with a proxy. So the register will have that access token. The proxy could use an introspection step to go back to the authorization server and then complete that registration. Next slide. Okay, so Krista, you wanna talk about some IMS?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, there is actually a use case for this. This is actually needed by the IMS for the WebRTC access to IMS service, and this registration is the only thing. Even though when we had the previous draft, this is the only part that was ever used by IMS. So the fact that it's scaled down do not really affect the IMS usage. We still have what's needed. So this is just if you have heard about the terms that IMS uses, they have something which is called Wiki, which is client. They have a WWSF, which is a basically the web server, and maybe most importantly in this context is the WAF, which is basically the authorization service. This could be, I mean, where that issues the tokens. This could be owned by the IMS operator. It could be a third party like Facebook or something like that. The way OAuth works in general. So next slide, please. So this is just a very simple use case how it works from IMS. You have the Wiki application, and the IMS user is the resource owner, and there's resource is the IMS subscription. So the application wants to have access to the IMS application. So it does the authorization request, gets a grant, sends it to the authentication server, gets the token, and the token is then sent in the registration. This number 5 is the zip register request, which is sent to the IMS network. So yeah, that's it. And then of course the IMS network matches this with the IMS user credentials.
So I think next slide just have a list of open issues. There are probably more things that we want to discuss, but we would like to get feedback from this group. Thoughts?
Hi, John Peterson. I hate it. No, it's fine, really. Like I said, is provided the scope of it is sufficiently scaled down to this registration case. Like I said, it's probably fine. I mean, I don't understand why you had a 302 on that initial slide.
We're open to discuss that.
There's a lot of little things like that
Sure.
that I don't understand.
Okay.
But
okay, thank you. Anybody else has any thoughts? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So who has read this draft? Okay, more hands. A few more. So I know that there was interest in this draft. Is it something to take on as a milestone right now, or
That's
would be
a Ben question.
a Ben question?
This is Ben. If the working group is interested in taking that milestone, I don't object.
Okay.
So do you want to call here, or do you want to do it on the mailing list?
I guess seeing who's interested. So if the working group should take this on as a working group item. Right? If you think that this should not be a working group item, that we shouldn't work on it. Oh,
okay.
How's the jabber room? On both? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
That was pretty clear.
Yep. All right. So that was the end of the previously published agenda. But as I mentioned, there was the very recently dispatched doc that was dispatched on Monday. And also Rafat wanted to talk about the digest. So Roland, why don't you come up and talk about the 850, sorry, I've got my notes here, but
Yeah, thank you.
all right, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. On Monday, I've presented in dispatch a addition to the reason header, which will or should add a location parameter, which has nothing to do with that what I presented before, because that is the Q850 location. That is the location within the PSTN, ISTN network where a call is released. And due to the fact that we are currently have hybrid networks where we have PSTN plus SIP networks in work, we have identified that we need this kind of location with regard, for example, the busy case. It's a difference if a user is busy or if we have sent the busy cause value from the network, and there we have different service behavior, and that's described within that draft, and I would like to proceed to work here within SIPCORE.
Okay, I put your slides from dispatch up, so get your overview, the locations,
yeah,
and why. So, okay, and I was, as an individual, looking at this, I thought that this seemed to be pretty straightforward and a small bit of work. So, who has read this draft? Okay. Yep. All right. So, any interest in this? Taking it on as a working group item. Okay. Awesome. So, if this should be a working group item. If you don't think it should be a working group item.
If I can have a pony.
Sorry.
I was just curious if this was a 3GPP meeting or an IETF meeting. Anyway, yes, I'm sure, yes, you know why I say that from the way that hum was oriented. Again, I'm sure we can find a way to tunnel everything left in the SS7 network we are not yet tunneling within SIP, sure.
I was expecting this comment.
Okay, thank you. Now, I guess I should say that we wouldn't be doing all of this all at once, but, just gauging interest.
This is Ben again. I'll comment. Some of these are kind of tiny. So, they could be done by just a kind of, does anyone object to this? Is it ready for working group last call sort of thing, and be through it really quick. So that doesn't mean they need to get in the way of, big work, but still.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, please, next slide, please. Okay, everyone knows that MD5 is broken. So next slide, please. So RFC 7616, it's the latest HTTP digest. So updated the algorithms that are supported with HTTP, SHA-256 as the default, 512 to 56 as a backup, and MD5 as for backward compatibility. The changes also requires the use of QOP parameter, and there is a new IANA registry for new algorithms. So that's what happened in the HTTP group. So next slide, please. So we want to follow the same recommendations there, or just follow in their step, just to make sure we're aligned with that. So the draft is talking about using the same algorithms with the same priority, requiring the QOP parameter and updating the SIP ABNF. And next slide, please. Now that there is that issue of SIP forking, and I hope that we can get some thoughts from this group here. Currently, the draft is talking about when messages forked, multiple proxies or multiple downstream servers could reply and challenge that request, and the endpoint is expected to kind of reply to multiple of those. So I wanted to get your thoughts on whether that makes sense, or should we do something else?
So what you're talking about is the subject matter of the very first draft I wrote for the IETF,
Okay.
which got rolled into 3261.
Okay.
To change that behavior, you're talking about opening up 3261 and redefining the way proxies deal with aggregating responses.
Okay.
Is this needed?
That's the question.
Systems that were designed that expected this behavior out of proxies. It's what's currently defined. How big those deployments are at this point, I don't know, but it is what the spec says.
Okay.
So if you think that the answer to is this needed is no, the scope of the problem that you're trying to ask for is open up 3261 and redefine proxies.
Okay. 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 Okay, so you're, what I'm hearing.
My strong suggestion to you is leave it alone.
Okay. 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 Any other thoughts?
Jonathan, I was commenting on the previous slide. I'd say this is just a thing that probably is right, but we should just make sure. I know that when stun/turn long-term credentials were designed to be able to use the same database as SIP, turn BIS, or I guess it's actually in stun BIS, is defining how to use something based on the HTTP digest, so we should make sure that those are aligned and can still use the same password databases. So that's just a thing that I think should be looked at and check the two drafts, and if either of them are wrong, figure out which one to fix.
So you're saying the stun draft is using the HTTP?
Yeah, basically they're also switching to using 256 rather than MD5. And
Correct.
Given that we wanted to, there was a design goal originally that they could share the same password databases, we should make sure that as they both move to SHA-256, that's still true.
I see.
So just review it, probably, so, you should review the stun disk draft and make sure that that's working.
Okay.
Krista, I agree with what Robert said, but what I don't understand is what is it actually that you want to achieve?
No, so the question was
regarding forking.
Right. I was thinking if that is needed in the first place, or the whole process of authenticating multiple downstream servers could be simplified somehow, and not requiring that proxy to aggregate that challenges back to the client, and the client to reply to all of those. Right. Go ahead. So
so you are happy if the client does not have to reply to all of those changes? Is that what you're saying? Or you
the question is that needed? Is there a use case that would require multiple end or downstream proxies will challenge a request, and then the input Is that okay? Yeah. So that's the answer. Okay. So that's I was looking for a real use case that needs this, right? Okay. Does that make sense? Sure. And we could talk about this. Yeah.
John Peterson, man, I've looked at this text in like forever. I think I wrote this text back in 3261, but is Q? Yeah, I know. Is QOP actually optional then? I mean,
which one?
So with if you're using MD5, I think you have to use QOP. And
I think 3261 is not. It was
reading
optional.
the text right now. What it says is that any algorithms that have a dependency on CNONs, including MD5, require the QOP directive be sent.
Oh, okay.
So it's impossible to use. So again, it says for backwards compatibility reasons with RFC, what is that, 2617, that technically the
that's the HTTP.
Yeah. But
okay.
But I mean, it says that if you have to use CNONs, you have to use QOP.
Okay.
So there's actually no case in SIP.
Okay.
We don't need to revise to say that you require QOP.
Sure, I agree with that. Okay. If that.
Yeah, I have no problem, obviously, with a draft that sensibly recommends that we don't use MD5 anymore, instead we use SHA-256. So again, this is something where I think we could maybe, if you do that narrow thing, none of us would be up here yapping about this, right? So let's do that narrow thing, and if we need to look at reopening proxy server behavior, let's do that in another draft.
No, I was hoping that we don't have to do that. I just was looking for a real use case that really needs this, otherwise. Okay, so that's it.
All right,
I think I got my answer.
All right. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Blue sheets. Has everybody signed the blue sheets? Right. No, I think we're done. Well, thank you.
It's getting close to done. Mr. Rich, regarding our possible
Indeed. I love pretty much every kind of food in Japanese is pretty high on the list.
Okay. Oh, good.
Okay, that's good.
So I'm going to go through opposites and games. You know, deities and demigods?
Yes.
The guy who wrote the photographic.
Oh, sweet.
And so I'm going to, I did the BMG. So let's see the original document.
All right, thank you.
We got about this. I'm sure you're.
Yes, I have that on my shelf. No, I can't because the grain of the is like a vaguely off grain.